Now, there was a gentleman, a Frenchman called Jean-Paul Nerrière, and he realized that people around the world were making do in English with a kind of cut-down English, but it wasn't always the same cut-down English. Lots of misunderstandings. So he thought, why can't we regularize this in some reasonable way so that everybody can communicate? He developed a thing called Globish. Now, the rules are standard English grammar, no jokes, as you said, because jokes, he said, I cannot understand jokes of my English colleagues. But also no idioms, so you can't push up daisies. Nerrière says this is correct English without the English culture.
So today we're talking about Globish, which was your suggestion. So I suppose for benefit of myself and the audience, could you give your summary of what it is and how you found it?
Well, that was a good summary there. Was that a recording from the book, or was it something else?
I stole it from, it was one of the public access broadcasters. I can't remember if it was Canadian or American, but they obviously did like a radio show on it or like a podcast.
Yeah.
So I stole it from them.
Okay, very good. Well, yeah. So there's a French intellectual called Olivier Roy, or Roy Olivier, I can't remember. And he was recommended to me recently, and he does a lot of work. He does a lot of work on a lot of things. He began as a scholar of Islam, and he talks a lot about religion and the influence of religion in France and in Europe. But then he also, in his later career, sort of got into culture and issues of globalization. So there's one chapter in the book which is about Globish, which is about basically English spoken in international communities, for example, the UN or the EU. But it's this weird variant of English where, okay, a good example of this is Bronze Age Pervert. Actually, he speaks Globish. Like, he speaks English in like the grammatically incorrect and kind of decontextualized way. I reckon the guy actually is a native English speaker, but he does it for kind of comedic effect. But anyway, so it's just a good example of it. Because if you speak to people, like, say you're in a room with an Italian person, a French person, Spanish person, or also an Asian person, and they're all going to speak English to each other because that's the most common language. So they end up speaking a kind of peculiar form of English, which is referred to as Globish. And it's basically like the idea is that it's a decontextualized and deculturized form of language.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why there's a reference to in the EU or in the UN when they're having these big meetings, and they're all speaking Globish. There's often a demand to not use innuendos or ambiguities or jokes because other people won't understand. It's not even for like politically correct reasons, like you'll offend people. It's even just people won't get it. It's because that requires too much context to understand. So anyway, it's an idea about that sort of language. So it's kind of a study of globalization and communication and
right.
And language.
Yeah. And this book is The Crisis of Culture, right?
Yeah, Crisis of Culture. Yeah.
Cool. I guess what I find interesting about it, and I guess it's kind of important to flag up the fact that these uses of language, and they're not a monolith, for example, because this kind of like universal language stuff has a long history going back to things like Esperanto, which is like an attempt to have a global shared language. But it has obviously it has like practical uses in the past, such as pidgin languages, I think they have there's like strange pidgin languages that were used in Iceland and like Japan by Portuguese sailors, which are like a mixture of like Icelandic and Portuguese and Japanese and Portuguese, which are like just practical things. But it's interesting because he also brings up in the book, he brings up stuff like Unicode, which is an attempt to, I guess, technocratize the entire like script of humanity and put it in one thing. And then you also have what you mentioned in the EU Parliament, which is Eurospeak, referred to as Eurospeak. And then you have the Globish stuff, and the guy who invented Globish is kind of interesting in a few ways, and we can go into that because I did some digging on him, and he's a good example of everything wrong with globalism, probably. But yeah, I thought this is from the European Commission, their advice on translation advice. So this is from their advice, and the quote is, expressions which are too specific to one language should be avoided as far as possible. What I find interesting is there's every excuse for these sorts of things. Oh, it's just like a practical thing, right? To avoid misunderstanding and so. And it's kind of like, well, you know, globalism's just a way to bring humanity together and avoid, if we have everyone interlinked by trade or whatever, then we're going to avoid war and blah, 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 blah. But the problem is this attitude, it's a kind of I suppose you could probably call it utilitarian attitude, has a bunch of other consequences. For example, you know, globalism, you have the like deracination of cultures all over the place. You have language becoming managerial grey slop that has absolutely no expression in it. And you know, just this is the chef's kiss to like why I don't really like the guy who invented Globish very much. He's just like, yeah, English language without that bloody English culture. And I suppose as an Englishman, that makes me feel a bit offended. But as an Irishman, you might know how that feels to have someone try and eradicate your culture. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I suppose because we're native speakers too, it doesn't really apply to us, right? Like because it's your mother tongue, as they say. So, like there's no.
But it is interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but it is really interesting how I've worked with I obviously know you, but I've worked with a lot of Irish guys as well. And sometimes there's like they'll say an expression. It's obviously English.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of an example, but there's lots of like funny
slang?
off the cuff expressions. It's maybe slang, but
Slang
using
phrases.
words in a way I wouldn't expect for something that I would express as well. And I don't know about you. Maybe it's not a huge problem for you just because the Anglo culture is so prominent in media and stuff, but maybe there were some expressions in England that you didn't understand. I don't know, but I had this experience with Irish co-workers at least, because it's the same language, right? But kind of.
Well, also, yeah, we have, I
idioms.
mean, geographically quite close, and also media. So there's a lot of like slang would be like slang is. We understand all of your slang. Like, I don't think there'd be any slang that you could say to me that maybe I wouldn't understand. But I do think
Okay.
there'd be slang, the Irish slang, which I think you wouldn't.
I'm feeling Hank Marvin.
Okay, I don't know that one.
That's unfair. I guess it's the Cockney stuff gets ridiculous, but it means I'm really hungry. It means I'm starving.
Okay, well, there clearly is. Like, if I stick on a Jason Statham film, I'm sure there's going to be one or two references in there actually that I'm like, what? You know, but I think it's going to be few and far between, right? That shared media, I think, and also just the fact that we speak the same native language. Yeah, but just a comment on the other stuff. The translation issue is interesting because that immediately becomes a little bit more political when you talk about translating books, like old books, because you know, English has become the kind of language by which everything gets translated through. You know, often what will happen is a book will be translated from, let's say, Italian into English, and then from English into you know, I don't know what, Japanese or something, um, because more people speak English. You know what I mean? Like good luck trying to find a translator of, you know, Italian to Japanese. I'm sure you could find one,
Mm.
but it's going to be a hell of a lot harder than just translating it into English and then getting an English translator to Japanese. That's going to be a much easier route, right?
Mm.
So there is that issue, and I don't really know. I don't have any practical experience or knowledge with book translations. I don't know, like, if that's the case. It's complete speculation, but I would imagine that is the case. If you talk to like the, you know, managers at, I don't know, Penguin Books or like whatever book company, I'm sure they're going to tell you that, oh yeah, we do that. We go from Italian to English and then English to Swedish or whatever. Um, so anyway, but like recently someone tried to retranslate the Iliad, and it was this kind of feminist scholar, and she was trying to retranslate it into and like I've seen comparisons of Robert, is it Robert Fagles? I think it's Robert Fagles, who was like the old, you know, early 20th century or even 19th century translator. I don't know how old he is, but you know, the old school translator versus the sort of new school translator. And I've seen passages put side by side, and it really is like, you know, as Zizek says, coffee without caffeine, beer without alcohol. Like there's a kind of there's a kind of taking away the potency of it in certain terms, and so there's that issue with globalized language, and trying to get rid of the ambiguities, the offensiveness, the jokes, the decontextualization. Um, the other thing I'll just say, and then I'll get back to you, is that his book, Crisis of Culture, the basic sort of theoretical outline of this is that he thinks that we're replacing culture with codes. So we used to have culture, and culture, I suppose, is a bit more ambiguous and a bit more deep and historically contextualized and a bit more particular, and also in a sense a bit more vague. Like culture is kind of based on certain values. Like you could have freedom, you could have sovereignty, you could have justice, honor, whatever. And these values can be interpreted in different ways. There's a sort of openness to them. It's like, well, how do you be honorable in this situation or that situation? There's a kind of human participation with that. Whereas codes, the kind of neoliberal codes that he says that are taking over, he'll use many examples. For example, like sexual politics, like the kind of codes of consent and taking away the ambiguities of flirtation or this sort of thing. And codes are these kind of stratified kind of instructions that are given to you. Do this, don't do this. He'll talk about how, you know, if you walk around today in like a city, you're going to see these signs telling you exactly what to do, even though it's really obvious. Like walk up the stairs on this side, walk down the stairs on this side. In the underground in London, you'll have that stupid uh, public service announcement saying, you know, if you see anything suspicious, report it. It's like, what do you mean suspicious? And so there's this kind of coddling of ourselves now with all these codes and these restrictions. And he thinks basically that the loss of culture, the deconstruction of culture, has led to a replacement to fill that void, and that's codes. And he doesn't just say it's in the West. He says it's also in Islam, and I would presume you're in Asia, so maybe you can tell us, but I presume in Asia too. So just one more thing, I'll go back to you. Because he started as a scholar of Islam, he says really interesting things about Islam. He says that like it's sort of fundamentalism today isn't a product of its religion. It's not traditional. It's modern. Like he studies the suicide bombers on these people, and he says that they don't have any religious knowledge. They don't read. They don't have a kind of rich, in-depth historical knowledge. They join up and they get given a kind of bunch of codes. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't do this. And they sort of follow this in a very obedient manner. And also that involves terrorism too. Um, you know, so it's like he basically makes the argument, no, like this isn't religion. These aren't fundamentalist religious people. This is the kind of use of religion in a very modern way, which is a really interesting argument to make. But yeah, so that's a bit. That's a lot in there. So I'll throw it back over to you.
Yeah, I think I suppose kind of one of the feminist insights that the private is political, but it's been true for a while. I mean, the use of certain languages like the Ukrainian language or Catalan language as well, it's kind of done as a political statement as well. And I suppose that's the tension between globalism and kind of, or just like larger political entities like Spain oppressing Catalan, for example, or Soviet Union oppressing Ukraine. But yeah, larger, it's kind of that dialectic between centralization and decentralization in a way. But yeah, the shift from culture to code is really interesting, because I mean, I don't know where you draw the line of what is culture, what is code, but a weird example, I remember when I was younger, I don't know if you remember that Baz Luhrmann version of Romeo and Juliet that was set in like modern LA or something.
With Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty good film. It's pretty enjoyable. But there was also, I remember at the time, and our teachers, you know, public school teachers, right, like saying, "Oh, there's a version of Shakespeare you can read in like text speak," and it was like in like shorthand text speak, like you would do on a Nokia phone with like emoticons. It's like before emoji.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, those are different gradations. You know, you've got the Shakespeare original, you know, text, which is actual culture, where, you know, Shakespeare's even like inventing words in the Anglo linguistic canon at that point. And then you've got the shift to, okay, you've got the same sentiment, but it's in an Americanized cinematic form. And then you've got a completely just like boiled and destroyed sausage of text speak at the other side. And it's, I don't know, I think it's very clear that you lose something along that scale in some way. But yeah, I think I don't know, I think it's interesting that the way language is used to signal a lot of political stuff. I suppose, you know, if you go out of your way to learn Esperanto, you're probably some sort of globalist or communist, frankly. Basically, like extreme globalist or communist in some way, right? And, you know, this has lots of forms. For example, I mean, maybe not so much now, but maybe, oh God, maybe like almost a decade ago now. But a decade ago, if you were using the word based, you're pretty much like in that online right subculture. Not so true now of that word. It's been completely proliferated, but it is interesting how, you know, simple words can be used to signal political allegiance and things like this. Or, you know, like the pronunciation, like, you know, people pronouncing Kiev as Kiev or whatever, to signal that they're on board with the war and stuff like that. It is interesting.
Yeah, no, that happens in Ireland the whole time, because we don't speak. Most people, like 8% of people, something like that, don't speak the Irish language on a kind of practical day-to-day basis. They only learn it in school, and there is an occasional, less so nowadays, because we've had an extremely sort of globalistic kind of government in the past 5, 6, 7 years. But I remember when I was younger, the Prime Minister Taoiseach said, he was being asked questions by an opposition politician in the Parliament in the Dáil, you know, and he was being scrutinized on police corruption, because there used to be actually some pretty bad police corruption in Ireland, which people don't really know about. Kind of third world level almost shit, like, and rightfully so, this politician was scrutinizing the Prime Minister about this. And the Prime Minister, Taoiseach, he speaks decent Irish. This other politician doesn't. So instead of answering him in English, he switched to Irish, so he could avoid he could avoid answering the question. And he knew the other guy didn't speak Irish, so he just said, "Bad about it, speaking Irish." And then it was this big controversy, because it was like, well, was he right to do that? Because it is Ireland, where you should speak Irish.
Kind of a flex as well, I think.
It's kind of a flex, but it's like, but you've been asked questions about police cover-up. But if you're deliberately switching language like that, you are just avoiding like the issue. So on one hand, it was kind of a flex. On the other hand, it was kind of a you know, an aversion of the question, and his job is to answer these questions. So it was a really interesting situation. So it is true sometimes language can be reduced to a political flex.
That's a wonderful hijacking of the
yeah.
politically correct logic of Ireland as well. Like, you're in the shit because of some corruption, but then you do the politically virtuous thing. And I suppose you're right. Like, people are trying, it just breaks the brain of the NPC. Like, is he a good guy or bad guy now? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it was an ingenious public stunt. It was Donald Trump level spontaneous ingenious public stunt. It's funny too, because that old prime minister, he's long gone now. He was one of the older sort of okay, they were all in on globalization, they were all in on liberalization, and they were all allowing the tech companies to come set up and pay no taxes. Like, they were as bad as everyone else, but they were a little bit more typically Irish, and they were a little bit more representative of the kind of countryside Irish people. Whereas the politicians that are in power now in Ireland, they're these complete kind of technocrats. They're all from Dublin 4, which is the kind of upper class part of Dublin. They're all from they don't know the country at all, and the standard has dropped a little bit, and that's one of those situations. But anyway, it's like using a language as a political flex, which is kind of part of what's happened in globalization, because we all speak English on a day-to-day basis, and then if you want to be like, oh yeah, but I'm really Irish and you're not, you just say a few words and then you go back to speaking English. It's such bullshit. Anyway.
Yeah. I think that's it. Well, it kind of proves a point that I've been saying for a while, though, that you said it yourself, that both of the political camps, they're pretty much moving in the same direction all the time towards that universal global order. And one kind of gives some red meat, some lip service to something more localist maybe. And you have, what I've realized is you kind of have the same thing in every single country that's under the hegemony of the US pretty much. And I think we've now entered it. Maybe. I don't know. The Trump presidency is going to be a difficult one, because it seems, I don't know. I thought it's difficult to know which direction that's going to go in, but I think that this is if I was to make a prediction, at least this would be it. I don't know what form it's going to take, but I do think we're entering a post neoliberal world, where the end of history stuff has in a way run its course. Now, whether we'll get a very weird version of the same order come out of the other side or something completely different, I don't know, but it's very clear that reality resists and is resisting this universalism. Because there is the human species does have joy, does have humor, does have idioms, does have idiosyncrasies. You can't just make everyone gray. That's science fiction stuff, and I don't know. That's my white pill, at least. I hope that's true.
Yeah, no,
reality does seem to be resisting that.
I agree with you, but what's interesting is that we're seeming going from a neoliberal, at least America is anyway, and I think Europe's in a slightly different situation, but America anyway is going from a neoliberal to a kind of tech feudal, big tech society.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that Elon Musk was recently at but he was Skyped in to a AfD German public convention, right? And he was saying, you guys shouldn't feel guilty about all of your ancestors, and you have your own particular culture, and that needs to be respected and all that stuff. And I was like, yeah, fair. Okay, all of that's true, but it's why do you need like a billionaire from South Africa who's living in San Francisco to tell you that. You know,
Well,
should be obvious. Like
yeah,
Skyping
like
in, speaking English to them, not speaking German, speaking English to them. And I had a feeling a lot of them in the audience I was watching it didn't 100% understand them because there was no subtitles on. And a lot of Germans have very good English, but I have a feeling, and this is not an insult, this is just kind of the way it is, but a lot of people in East Germany or the AfD supporting people would have worse English than the other kind of Germans. So I had a feeling also they didn't completely understand what he was saying at the time. So the whole situation was so convoluted, I thought. It was kind of this, it was kind of like on an ethical level, on a sentimental level, there was an effort to move past that sort of globalized neoliberal world, but like on a kind of practical level of the language, of the technology, and all that, it was like it's like they were still stuck in it, if that makes sense.
yeah, I mean, but this is this containment that is just completely unstoppable for some reason. It's the same. You saw the same thing with Brexit, where if you just watch the news, you'd think that Britain was going in some rightist direction or something. But after Brexit, immigration skyrocketed, for example, and
Yeah.
I'm pretty whether it's right or wrong, it's like pretty obvious that's the main reason why people voted for it. And yeah, there's a huge hypocrisy, and you can see, I don't know, like I can see why people have gone off Musk, especially on the right, because he's giving red meat and lip service, like he's like doing anti-Keir Starmer tweets and stuff, and like you said, calling into AfD conferences. But like you said, he's this son of an oligarch. He's an immigrant, and he wants really high immigration tied to work contracts. He wants the globalist dream. He wants the neoliberal dream. He wants the world to become an airport. He wants people to become fungible economic units.
Well, also
he's an autistic tech guy. Of course, that's the way he thinks.
But also, he's taken this kind of language stuff to the furthest level, because he had this idea of wiring our brains in order to communicate telepathically. So he's literally, he's like, Zizek has a book. I haven't read it. It's called Hegel and the Wire Brain, and I should get around to reading it, because it's very relevant to this conversation, because it's basically it brings up the philosophy of language. Like, what is a language? Like, is a language just a kind of code by which we can say like, is it just a kind of pure it's like, is language a pure translating a object or a set of assertions or whatever facts to another person, or is language more complicated than that? And I think Zizek would take the view that language is more complicated than that, so it's not going to work. But it's funny, because Musk is probably the most radical Globish kind of candidate in that sense in the world, actually.
I don't know the guy. I don't know the guy personally, but I get the suspicion especially from just off the cuff communications he has on X. He's got like a midwit vibe. I don't know, like
midwit. Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but what I'm saying is that a lot of the managerial technocratic push, and I guess neoliberal push, all this stuff is kind of, let's do this stuff because we can. And it's not a very philosophical ideology, because what we call AI was developed and pushed out, right? And it's not AI. It doesn't think. It's a language model. I'm not saying that. And what I'm saying is it doesn't mean you've got a friend in your pocket. That's what everyone was imagining with AI. What it does is it's just destroyed language generation and knowledge work. That's what it does. And the Neuralink thing's very similar. I think a lot of these sci-fi midwit dreams come from sci-fi. They come from books and movies and stuff. And it's true now of that side of politics as much as it ever was with the left, where they constantly compare, like their sources are not philosophical or political sources. They're not intellectual sources. There's a strain of anti-intellectualism that goes through this, which is why I call it midwit. I'm not just using it as a pejorative. But they don't cite things like that. They cite things like Star Wars and Star Trek, and that's their intellectual backing for all this stuff. And it's, yeah, like you were saying, like Neuralink, well, what is it going to do? And it's kind of like with AI, well, we want to make AI. What is it going to do? Like it's not really, these things aren't thought about before they're kind of done. And with the Neuralink thing, it's like, well, okay, are we just going to communicate language? Like, what are we going to communicate? Sensations in the body? Like, and then how, again, like, because the AI stuff was done, and now the EU is doing some, like, crazy attempts to regulate whatever's just been unleashed on the world. And I suspect the same thing might be done with Neuralink. Like, if you can send information to the CNS, why can't you, once someone's hooked up, why can't you just torture them infinitely?
Yeah.
And in fact, okay, why don't we remove the CNS from the body, which is a thing that perishes, and try and keep it stable? And then, okay, now you've got artificial time production. You've got the possibility of just, I don't know what you would use it for, like either living forever as just a conscious agent, or punishing someone with literal hell. That's something you could possibly do with that, if that's what it's describing. And I don't know, I'm not really like I'm not a Luddite, I don't think, but I think that strain of anti-intellectualism that runs, ironically, anti-intellectualism runs through the technocratic worldview. And I think it's kind of dangerous. I think it's quite dangerous.
Well, that's exactly my problem.
It results in the, you know, the propaganda you see. There's no reflection on the Trump stuff. Like, people are riding high because they've just won an election. And I don't know. Lots of people talked about this recently. It's just it's containment at a higher level, but at the base level, it's just slop. And you can see that that's what Elon Musk has done to the X platform. And I mean, you know, as if TikTok couldn't get more sloppier, like he's going to buy that and do the same thing with it.
He's a slop king.
Maybe he is the slop king.
He's the king.
He got rich in South Africa from slop mining.
Now he wants to mine our data to create the best slop production in the world.
Optimized slop that he will transmit directly into your central nervous system.
It's so bad. No, Twitter is so bad today. Like, I go on it and I literally feel like physically exhausted after about 5 minutes of scrolling through it.
It is actually astonishing how bad it's gone in a very short period of time, particularly the For You tab.
Yeah. What's the For You tab?
It's the one on the furthest left-hand side, and it kind of gives you the most popular. But we know now that he's gaming the algorithm, so
I just click home and then just scroll down. I don't have like a specific.
Okay, not helping the boomer allegations, Owen.
No. Well, I don't want the For You. Like, you know, clearly it's not good.
If you click on following, it'll just give you who you're following, which I find is much more useful if you actually have a decent curated.
I'm gonna do that because I keep getting like just slop from fucking accounts that I don't follow, like the animal slop, and like I so much animal slop. I go on Twitter today. It's just like oh, like a horse who's friends with a duck or something.
Well, that's another crazy thing that has definitely changed very recently. Is especially on mobile, like when you watch a video, it turns into like the TikTok view. You know, where it starts scrolling down and just showing you like new videos, which is dangerous.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
If you respect your time, if you respect your own time, because you're going to be watching horses and ducks be friends for hours and hours.
And like, it's annoying because it is actually quite amusing to watch one or two of those videos, but then it's like, okay, I'm not watching another one, but it draws you in as a hypnotic draw, you know. And you'll often do it. Like say you're working or something, or you're cleaning your kitchen or whatever, and you want to sit down and have a break for 5 minutes. That's when it gets you. That's when it gets you because it just kind
Well,
of
hypnotic is a
hypnotizes you.
perfect word to use. It's true of, I don't know too many people who use Instagram, but it's definitely true of YouTube Shorts, definitely true of Instagram Reels, which is the women internet pretty much. And so I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyone who watches those kinds of things, or if you see someone you know watching it, like do as an experiment, do this because I've done it many times and I always get the same response. Ask them afterwards, be like, "Oh, what are you watching?" And they'll say like, "Oh, YouTube Shorts or like Instagram Reels or whatever." And you ask them what did they watch? Like 90% of the time they can't tell you, and they've just spent like half an hour,
Yeah, it's good.
watching.
Yeah. God, awful. Yeah, it's fucking awful. But there's some other, I suppose. What's the next area we could go into talking about in regards to this?
Oh, I wanted to talk
Okay.
about, and I've got a video of him talking about Globish, which is from
Okay,
I
go
don't
for
know,
it.
in my opinion, a bit of a funny watch. But the guy who like invented, I'm going to use that in quotes, Jean-Paul Narrière. I don't know if in the Crisis of Culture he actually talks about the inventor, but do you know anything about the inventor before I start?
No,
Obviously he's French, right? But
other than he's French, no, I have no idea.
good. Okay, fine. So I want you to try and guess what his career is. Like, what? Obviously, he invented Globish, fine. But what was his career before he did that?
It's got to be
What do
like
you think?
something finance or tech, something where it's
Oh
everything.
yes, dude. Yes, he was an
Yeah.
IBM executive.
Yeah,
So
it's got to be
anyone who
something
knows,
where everything's reduced to ones and zeros. That has to be it, you know?
well, but not only that, and I mean, I'm saying this as a tech guy, but IBM was dead in like the 90s, let alone more modern times. Like it's
Yeah.
now just a consulting company, like a hollowed out shell.
It used to be huge,
And I
right?
actually, when I was at university, I did like a mentoring scheme at IBM, which was very
What was that like?
interesting. It was just, I wasn't like philosophical or reflective at the time or anything like that. But in hindsight, it made me realize that um, it's a perfect example of like the spreadsheet economy. Like people being in meetings all the time for no reason, and you have to do reports on stuff and it doesn't really make any sense. Like they don't like, it's like they don't really do anything, but they hold some capital, they have some projects, and they do some consulting and stuff. And like IBM, I guess they fund, probably the most important thing they do is they fund research projects. But apart from that, it's definitely a good example of like tech old money. But I don't know. In my opinion, this guy, he just seems like the perfect. He's like peak PMC, I would say. Like
Well,
peak PMC.
just before you play this clip, I want to, because that's something we can talk about after. I want to talk about the kind of the change in the elites, because I do
Yeah.
think this is important, because Musk is a good example of a change in the elites. And you were talking about tech old money, and I'm like, old money that never knew what to do with tech, right? It never knew how to handle it. Like I feel like IBM's a good example of that. I feel like old money, because you had the industrialists of like the 19th century and the early 20th century. Then you had the kind of, I don't know, the finance people, the technocrats, maybe, and then you have the tech oligarchs. So I feel like there's like different, like Western capitalism has gone through these transitions of elites, oligarchical kind of. They're all mercantile elites, right? But they're kind of oligarchical elites, and there is something. I don't know exactly how to put it yet, but there's something, a reflection of their character and a use and interaction with this technology, particularly in context to like globalization and like the use of language and the reduction of language to ones and zeros, all that kind of stuff. There's something there. Like I don't know exactly how to put it. There's a book in there somewhere. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I don't know, this is connected to some of my writing recently, but it seems to me at least that, at least the way that Western history has gone, is that at least in terms of techniques, I'd say, the previous iteration gives birth to the thing that destroys it, if that makes sense. Like the revolution eats its children. And the prime example for the most recent thing that's happening is that to argue kind of steelman IBM is actually, to be fair, they had a big hand in establishing telecommunications and the internet, basically, which is a force which has destroyed them, basically, gutted them out and made them just useless, like, basically. And I think lots of technologies give birth to the thing that destroys them. Another good example is the printing press. And so my point is, I do think that this is my own work recently, but I think that I don't think we're moving to the attention age. I think we're already in the attention age. We've moved from the information age to the attention age already.
That's a good way of putting it. Like, because slop is attention. Slop is the attention.
No, like, it's not information in the traditional sense. The actual, because we had that in the 2010s, I think, with Facebook and stuff, where actually the most valuable thing was your data. And that's still true, but we've moved past that to actually now the most valuable thing is attention.
Yeah. Well, that's
my next book. You can buy that soon.
Well, no, that's really good, because that's what Aurelio called emotional synchronization. Like the media will eventually move towards a state where it's not going to be this sort of detached informational society. It's going to be, and he compares reading to this modern media. But there's probably a stage in the middle, because he kind of compared the old kind of bourgeois world of reading newspapers and books and maybe listening to radio broadcasts, maybe at the most, maybe a bit of broadcast television, to kind of digital, informational, instantaneous communication. But there's probably a stage in the middle, as you're pointing out, where there's a kind of a transition from the information age to the kind of maybe we could call it the literary age or something, I don't know, to the information age. But there's a stage in the middle, as you're saying, from like information to attention. That's an important transition, I think. And slop, like King of Slop, he's maneuvering attention, and that's what, and like that's the funny thing, is that like it's highly politicized too, in a kind of it's politicized, but not in the way I would like it to be politicized, but it's politicized in a certain way, because you have Musk now stirring up shit. Now, sometimes it's good. Sometimes he's justified in doing it. Like, but you have Musk now stirring up shit around the world, and all these different issues, like the grooming gangs or the AFD in Germany and so on. And like, I'm not saying he's on the wrong side. It's just more like, what's he playing at? Like, what's his grand scheme here? Because like, it does seem like he buying Twitter at a loss, of course, getting involved in all these different things. He's kind of playing a kind of a power game, a kind of global power game, but he's doing it through attention and through kind of stimulating outrage, obviously, at the system, even though that outrage is probably justified a lot of the time. It's just interesting that, like, why he cares, like why is he interested? It's weird. I don't know.
I don't think he's a bad person.
No.
And I think, I don't know. I've been like being very negative about a lot of people recently, but I just think he just reminds me, especially as someone who used to work in tech, he just reminds me of a lot of very like highly intelligent, autistic, not particularly cultural or well-read people I've worked with.
Well,
I think he's just a variety of he's just one of these people who happened to be born into money and had some good ideas, basically, and made some good moves, I think. And the problem is, like I said, those people like that who I've known, like incredibly intelligent, like I would 100% trust them to build me something like a technical system if I wanted a technical system. Would I want them to make like moral decisions for the human race or the country? Probably not. Probably not. There's something missing when you get to that level of intelligence, when you get to that level I guess, technical and materialist outlook that is lacking any sort of cultural reflection. And any kind of it really lives in presentism. It really lives in the present time. It doesn't have a sense of history. You lose something ethical that I can't put my finger on, but it takes you in some horrible directions, which I think is happening with Elon Musk. I think his strategy, his personality and his abilities have been perfect for what he's done so far, but I think he's hit a ceiling. I don't think it's a ceiling in terms of that he can't do it. I think he probably it's probably going to happen in a way. But what I'm saying is he's hit a ceiling, and this is probably some people call it like emotional intelligence, but I think he's basically finally gotten to the point where he can't do a thing, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the entire post-war strata of elites, though. I think they've built their own. This problem has been built in since after World War II. This kind of technocratic disposition. Now it's gotten worse in some ways over time, and in some ways, the tech oligarchs are a little like Trump and Musk and so on. Although Trump's not a tech oligarch, but still, in some ways they're a little bit better, I think. But they're a continuation and an exaggeration of a certain problem of a kind of elites that are educated on tech, on management of systems, on all that stuff. Like not on politics, not on history, not on philosophy, not on any spiritual or religious context. And obviously, it's all become decontextualized from all of that, and also from locality too. Like I wonder if Musk really knows anything about Germany, or like knows anything about East or West Germany. And you know what I mean? Like I would just be reluctant to stick even if he's on the right moral side of the argument in certain contexts, I would be reluctant to stick my finger into a situation that I wasn't really like informed enough about, or had like experience of, or like knew the context of. And Musk doesn't seem to care, because they see the world as a flat screen. They don't think, well, I shouldn't involve myself in this until I know the deeper levels to this. The context is because the world's a flat screen to them. So it's like, well, why shouldn't I play this game? It's the same as that game. Why shouldn't I scroll on this part of the screen, because it's the same as this part of the screen? I don't know. It's not going to end well.
And to give some balance as well, if we're talking about elites, because this is something that's come up obviously with the Biden administration, but hasn't really been flagged up with, especially this Trump administration. It depends who you like appoints in important positions, but Trump himself, he's a boomer. Trump is a boomer. And Trump is, he's more sprightly, seems more with it, but he's the same age as the people we were criticizing for being a kleptocracy. So, maybe Musk will be this example of the transition to some sort of new elite that's finally coming after 100 years almost. But we do still live under that regime in some ways. And I speak about German history. There's one part of German history they will definitely all know about for a good reason. And that's something that still drives everything to do with the Western outlook, I think.
Yeah, and like that is the interesting part about someone like Musk, is that like at least on the level of sentiment, he has the right idea. It's like we have to move past that like debt that we're putting ourselves in, and we have to because the whole post-war project is built on this like kind of guilt of what happened in World War II, which is then abstracted to everything about the West in every context. And like his statement to the AfD, which is basically like, you don't feel guilty. I mean, that's absolutely ultimately correct, and that's one kind of little bit of white pill that I have about this. It's like, even though they're these fucking tech autists and they see the world as a flat screen, they do at least move away from this kind of moral burden that the technocratic post-war boomers all have, which is like, we're all definitely in debt and unburdened to whatever colonialism or the Holocaust or blah 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 blah. And then that of course gets decontextualized. So if you're fucking Norwegian, you're guilty of that. If you're Irish, you're guilty of that. If you're Italian, you're guilty of that. It's not even like imposed on these specific countries. The whole West becomes a big collective of debt carrying bullshit. So that part I'm a little bit white pilled about. Yeah. So fair enough on that part.
Yeah, in that respect, the vibe has shifted, and I should have seen it coming, because a part of me thought, oh, the game's up in like 2017, I think it was, when my brother, who's complete normie by all accounts, guy's a chef. No offense to him, great guy, great chef, but he quoted, like, remember that video, some sort of protest, and that really ugly guy was like, "You're a white male." And my brother quoted this video to me. I never spoke to him about anything to do with that, but he quoted it to me in one context, and a part of me was like, "Oh man, once the normies start regurgitating those sorts of sentiments, the jig is up." But it is weird, because I'm even like maybe 5 years ago or so, you have to, if you're out having a drink with someone or whatever, someone who's fairly normie or maybe even slightly politically engaged with the system, you would have to kind of watch your language, and sometimes you would get lectured in a way about something, or and that doesn't happen, I don't think, anymore between Western people. I feel like people have become more conscious of the ways in which the previous system was trying to control them. I'm not saying they aren't controlled by the system ongoing, but it does seem like the vibe has shifted in the discourse. And maybe it's probably because I'm a rightist, but I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, fair. Yeah, but I do feel that the kind of the debt, the feeling of debt, and carrying the debt, and it's our job to carry debt. Like, I still see that around. I still feel that with normies. I still feel when it's out there, like, it's not as obnoxious. It's lost its kind of activist. The whole 2010s, there was this kind of activist feel to it. Like, oh, we're gonna like turn this guilt and debt into like a kind of very, very kind of performative kind of outrage at certain groups or certain people, and like condemn people publicly. I do feel like that energy is dissipated, but I still feel this. I still feel this kind of dowery, dampy guiltness in people that fucking frustrates me.
I know what you're talking about, and I think that's two things. Is that we're very clearly either in the winter of Western culture, or we're entering it. So that's part of it. That's why the West feels tired, I think, and Western culture feels tired, and Western people just seem tired. Second thing is, I think that, whether we like it or not, we still live in the world of the ontological world of Christianity. Like, Western people still live in that world, and that world is very much in a lot of context tied to guilt.
Yeah, but then again, we could have a larger conversation about Christianity too, because I think that's true. But there is moments in Christianity where you have real radical subversions, like the Crusades and stuff like that. Like, there are these kind of contradictions and paradoxes which happen within Christianity itself. But I don't know. Yeah, no, you're probably right. But generally, just like, I think, just to go back to your point about the previous order coming up with the conditions for its own downfall. I do think in some sense that applies to what we're talking about here. And I like this Musk's giant face, his big autistic face on his big screen in this AFD meeting. You have to see it. It's so remarkable.
Is it? Oh, now you're describing it. It reminds me of like the Big Brother screen from 1984 almost. The slot king is here to address the troops.
Like, he doesn't even say Guten Tag. He doesn't even say any. He just goes straight in. Oh, hi everyone, and he's not even like enthusiastic. He's not even like, yes, we're gonna fuck it. He's just like, oh, everyone. Yeah, I just want to make a little video. You guys shouldn't be like so guilty the whole time and shit like that. That's not cool. And like, it's so casual, and it just reminds me of like, just because we're talking about this kind of abstract, globalized screen world where everything is flat and there's no depth and context to anything. And I do think, in that sense, that the post-war kind of mythology of the guilt of the West, and particularly, of course, of the Holocaust and the Nazis and blah blah blah, the whole mythology around that. I'm not talking mythology in the sense that like a particular historical thing is untrue. I'm not getting into a revisionist thing at all. I'm just saying that the sentiment of, that kind of theological feeling, or the sentiment of Western guilt, is kind of hard to enforce in this flat world, because again, it's departicularized. I think that, in like 1980, when the world was still a bit more local and particular, you could kind of say, oh yeah, the Germans are guilty of this, the English are guilty of
Well,
that, and the Americans are guilty of this. But like, when you flatten everything out, and it's like, oh, the whole of West is guilty, and
yeah.
we're all the same. It's like, doesn't make any fucking sense anymore. Like, it just starts
Yeah,
to be
also,
ridiculous. So,
when Hans is living in Bavaria wearing lederhosen, eating a pretzel and drinking beer, you're like, yes, that's a German guy and you should feel guilty. When, I don't know, some Turkish guy is living in Berlin and working in the kebab shop, it's like, you should be
Yeah.
guilty. For Germany's, it loses all
Exactly.
reference points. And that is an interesting example of the post-war system implementing something demographically which destroys its theology.
Exactly.
It's
Yes.
interesting, very interesting. I guess it's not just, doesn't just apply to technic context. It also applies to like demographic and socio-political context as well.
Absolutely true. And the other example here is like gender and family issues. It's like, I've been saying this for so long. You're gonna invite in loads of people from like third world countries, or just outside the West, that don't have the same history of like, gender equality or whatever, and then you're gonna try and pose that onto them. It's just not gonna work. Like, you're just like, your whole moral matrix is being undermined by their
Yeah.
own kind of global appetite. The appetite for globalization, like cheaper labor, more whatever, like, more technocracy. The whole appetite globalization has is undermining its own moral matrix, and it's fascinating to see. Anyway.
Rousseau's noble savage might be the most dangerous idea of all time, and it's very funny how leftist egalitarians were like, I don't know, like, we should let as many immigrants in as possible because we should be egalitarian, and then the immigrants come in and they're less egalitarian than the populations they replaced. And they're like, no, not like that. And another good example of the system giving rise to the thing which destroys it, but also, I suppose in this context, it would be containment as well, is that the blindness of the system to the problems bubbling underneath gave rise to Trump.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
Like, that's the system is the reason for Trump, and now the system has accepted and co-opted him in a way that's actually, I would argue, it seems at the moment, has got the populace, especially the American rural populace, kind of back on board with the consensus in a way. Whether that will last, I don't know, but it seems to be doing the job for them.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, do we want to have a look at Jean-Paul Larrière talking? It's kind of I watched some of it. It's kind of a boring video. So if it's really boring, we can just whatever. But he says some funny stuff in there.
Well, let's watch a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very the whole production. This thing that he's trying to sell is very PMC. Why is that not there? Oh, there we go.
Choisir un autre métier et j'ai appris à piloter des avions. J'ai volé un peu partout dans le monde et la géographie, c'est exact, m'a beaucoup servi.
In the last 50 years, more and more the people of the world have been trying to use a common language. Hello.
Sorry, he's also got strong boomer energy as well, I just wanted to say.
And a lot of those 50 years, I was an international marketing executive for IBM and for other major multinational companies. And I heard a lot of variations of English. Now, my voice tells you already that I am not American and I am not English. I am French, of course. Well, nobody is perfect. But this way of speaking did not...
Sorry, is that the guilt again?
Yeah, no one's
I'm
perfect.
French. No one's perfect. What could you be? Like a global citizen? Would that make you perfect? I don't understand.
not prevent me from doing well in the most important international jobs. When I travel to Japan, to Korea, Europe, Asia, everywhere, to the Americas, people seem happy to do their business in English with me because my English was as limited as their English. It was easier for us to speak English with each other because we all had problems, but they were never very different problems. And this was my discovery. If we all had the same limitations, it would be the same as if we had no limitations at all. That was when I developed Globish, the language tool based on English that would allow everyone to talk across the world. I codified those limitations so that people could learn just those things and then have a very easy time with communication. With 1,500 of the most common words of English, you can say all you need or want. Maybe not perfectly, but understandably. With simple sentence structures and no idioms that we can understand and no jokes.
I don't know about you, but the no jokes thing for me is the most it's kind of terrifying.
Yeah,
Let's remove joy from the world because it's not efficient enough. That bothers me on a deep level.
Yeah, yeah.
I know humanity is messy and broken, but Jesus, that's really dark, I think.
Yeah, and also I just not even that practically good. Like no idioms or no phrases. People like I feel like there's two different forms of learning English. There's learning English for people who want to live in an English-speaking country, and there's learning English for people who just want to communicate in business contexts. So not live, but just for that business context. Because if you want to live in an English-speaking country, I mean, the same goes if you want to live in France or live in Germany or whatever. Like that, you have to learn some of the colloquialisms and idioms because you're just going to get like completely confused if you don't. Like for example, the word pretty, we use pretty for very a lot. I was pretty cold today. It's pretty cold today. Like like if you say this to one of these Globish speaking people, right? They'll be like, "What? Who's pretty? Who's what? Who's pretty?" It's like it's I suppose, yeah, it's learning English not for living in the English speaking world, but for just for that communication.
Like you said, this is a language for people in boardrooms, people in airports.
Yeah.
It's not a living, breathing language. And it also, I think, this is kind of going back to the PMC thing, is this guy is completely, from my assessment, my, I guess, kind of mean assessment, he just seems, I don't know, he's obviously someone who's had a good job and like traveled and had good money all his life, and probably only talked to a certain kind of person in the same like bracket, basically. This is a worldly language devoid of any worldly experience or context.
Yeah, and even like I'm so like even the discussion of globalization, like we should also caveat different forms of globalization, right? Because I mean, you have the globalization of the ancient world, Rome, for example, and you have globalization of the modern world. And I feel like one of the things about modern globalization is that, like, this is actually something that Michael Lind points out. He's one of these guys who talks about managerialism, and he says that we shouldn't really believe the idea that our kind of whatever neoliberal rulers are truly like cosmopolitan. Like they actually, if you study them, they normally marry someone from the same city as them, from the same ethnicity as them. They normally live there, and so on. They're not really interested in the world and different cultures and so on. Like it's a kind of well, I suppose it's what you call a decultured, exactly what Oliver, the author we were talking about earlier, decultured form of globalization. It's not a deep intrigue with other cultures and a desire to really like live among them or be with them. It's a kind of corporate interaction. So these people like they'll speak English to the other people from different countries in the boardroom, as you were saying, but they'll go back home and they'll speak to their family or their wife or their kids in French or in Chinese or whatever, right? And like they're not really living in it, because I feel like there's also a generational thing there too. Like young people that travel and young people that want to live in different countries, they'll try jump in. They'll be like, "Oh, I want to, like live among you people and see your kind of ways of life or whatever." And then there's the kind of globalization of the kind of the wealthy technocrats and the businessmen and the finance people, and as you were saying, it's boardroom interaction, and it kind of
Yeah.
stops there. It stops there basically.
Yeah. And you just get a Netflix view of the world, because I've spoken to a lot of older people who are like well traveled, like they've been to like business trips all over the world. They've gone to like they'll have their holiday and they'll spend a week, maybe 2 weeks somewhere, and they've traveled the world. They've gone to all the different countries, but they don't really know anything about any of the countries in a way that you couldn't get from sitting home and watching travel documentaries. I can tell you things about other countries that you probably wouldn't be able to get from watching Netflix.
Yeah.
And it's like you were saying, actually, it's a completely risk-averse way of looking at experiencing the actual diversity of the global world. Like a completely risk-averse. Like this is the reason why there is a queue of these fucking people at the top of Mount Everest now. There's a reason why there's a queue of people at the top, because that's the place to go. And sitting on the beach is a place to go, and then going on your business trip to Reykjavik is a place to go. Do you know anything about those places you've been to? No. Do you know anything about the people who are carrying your bags up the mountain? No. Yeah, sure, you've gone and traveled to all these places because that's what culture's told you to do. You've not actually had any agency. You've not actually experienced any of these places. You've not been in a risky situation. You've not lived somewhere.
Well, it's boomer globalization. Like I really do feel like the boomers lived in this time where it's like, and like the EU frustrates me in some ways, because like the EU had an opportunity to do something very good, and it kind of remained in this technocratic boomer disposition. Like it's superficial. Like it's stuck in that boardroom communication, and it doesn't move past that. And I kind of think going past that a little bit, although I would particularize it, I think we need to be more realistic about it. Maybe the world is not a flat surface. The world is not a global family. We do need forms of globalization, but maybe more localized forms of globalization, if that makes sense. That sounds like a contradiction, I know, but like the EU could have been a more localized, for example, form of globalization.
Oh yeah, no, it's not a rightist position to be against the European nations working together.
Yeah,
it's just in its form that was proposed. It's completely. I don't know. See, is it more of an American project than a European project? I'd argue.
Yeah, like if it's able to move past that boardroom structure, it actually could be something really, 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 really good. Because I mean, if if you look, for example, at the old Catholic Church, people from different countries would go building monasteries in different European countries, and there was actually a lot of like like the Crusades, for example. You got armies of French people, German people. The English got involved at the end. Multiculturalism isn't just this one thing that we have today with the kind of boomer technocratic boardroom world. Like there's different forms of it, and it's something I try push a little bit with people, the conservatives on the right. Like, don't let globalism and cosmopolitanism and multiculturalism be defined simply by this sort of thing, and then just reject it all and go, we have to return to a provincial existence, because that's not going to work. That's not going to work today, and it's not even desirable in every way anyway.
No,
like,
it's not. You're right.
It's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah, but you've got a good point, and I think the right should keep that in mind, because I don't know. Yeah, like you said, I mean, isolationism. Okay, maybe it could kind of work in the sense that people would survive or something, but whether it's desirable, like even not just in a modern context, in the ancient world, I don't think isolationism is desirable. Like, but yeah, I don't know. Just to give kind of the final cherry on top, our friend Mr. Narriere here, to give an example of how he's not, your egalitarian leftist globalist, and truly is an example of the boardroom globalism. He didn't just invent Globish out of the goodness of his heart. This guy painted it. He patented Globish. Like he's registered it under a trademark,
but it's a language. How can you do that?
I know. But in this world order, you can patent a language.
So every time you speak it, you have to give him like a few cents.
I don't think that's how it works, but I think like publish a book that's like a Globish language book, you have to do something. I don't know, but anyway, it's just an example of the mindset, Anyway, speaking of which, are we bored of this guy, or do we want to listen to some more?
Play another like 30 seconds. I want to hear him again.
Okay, he's funny. There's some boomer stuff that happens.
But as a Frenchman, I cannot understand what is so funny about the jokes my American friends always use to begin a speech. But I like to be kind, so I laugh with them. So that is what we are doing now. We are making it more comfortable for people of the world to talk now using Globish. When people can talk together without worrying about their English, they enjoy taking the responsibility for communication. And when people understand each other's Globish, then that saves a lot of time, and that saves a lot of money. Of course, some English speakers just wanted to laugh at us and call it broken English. I guess they thought we were all broken, except them. Well, no one likes to be called broken. And this is why I decided to call this by a special word, Globish. Globish is correct English without the English culture. It is English that is just a tool and not a whole way of life. And we demonstrate this level of English is enough. Because I was a businessman, and it seemed to be that if we could all speak the same kind of simple Globish, then the world could do much more business. Globish will give us a high return on investment. If people can use a lot of English, but not all of it, they can already do any kind of global business. The easy training in Globish costs much less time and much less money than English, which is endless. And very soon, more employees can use more of their skills to help their organizations compete in a global marketplace. As soon as a native English speaker can accept Globish,
he's been digging through clip art looking for these.
Well, then he or she will also be better understood and will become part of the winning team. Globish is not just a good idea. It is a good idea served by several powerful tools. Well, there is software that tells you what words in a document
Right.
are not Globish.
And this is just, I don't know, this last bit's just him
Yeah.
talking about the books he wants to sell and the software he wants to sell people, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know. It kind of, to me, it's dark because he's just like, yeah, it saves time, saves money. That's all that matters. I don't have to bother with, you know, pesky humor that I can't understand.
Mm. But like,
They're
especially when he
laughing at you,
says,
sir, not with you.
yeah, especially when he says, if native English speakers can accept this, it's like you're kind of asking them to accept. Like, but like that's kind of really unfair because then it's like native English speakers are reducing their language to this kind of corporate simplified thing. But then
Right.
all these other people have their native language, which is rich and endless. But English
Exactly, yeah.
speakers, there is a kind of like there is a curse and a benefit to speaking fluent English. One is that
Yeah.
you can sort of, it makes travel easy, it makes being understood easy, and also it makes reading book translations easier to get, and it makes, I suppose, learning other languages is in some ways easier because you can find an English speaking, if you want to learn Japanese, for example, you can find an English speaking teacher that also speaks Japanese way easier than if you only speak Romanian or something, right? So there's all these practical benefits to it, but the downside to it is that like your language is sort of being used as something which is being codified, whereas other people can then retain their languages, you know, and then they can use your codified language, but then they can in their spare time speak to their family and friends
Yeah.
in
And it's
the
annoying, you know,
rich
people-
languages there, you know.
People hear that you're British, they're just like, oh, Harry Potter. And you're like, okay, cool. And, you know, our friend Jean Paul there was a, you know, great example of just the ressentiment that a lot of, I think, continental people feel towards the Anglo. You know, his villain there was the man in the bowler hat who wants you to use, like, actually use the language.
Yeah.
That's his villain. It's the Anglo, the pesky Anglo.
Yeah. I mean, like I could see why there's resentment after World War II, kind of being put in this kind of put by the Americans in this kind of subdued position. But like, yeah, but like it is not a solution to reduce the language to this, because you know, that already happens between the English speaking world itself. If you get like Australian people, English people, American people in a room together, there's a whole lot of like references which are going to be excluded. That for example, Australians are full of like these funny like slang and references, and they're not going to be able to use those.
Well, and here's
in
the thing:
context of American English
So-
people. So it's not just continental people; it's also
funny
English
slang
people.
references and accents. That's what makes Australians unique and who they are. That's what makes
Yeah,
the world
yeah.
interesting, Jean Paul.
Yeah. Very.